Hi class. Today we continue discussing HTML and CSS topics with a basic introduction to web forms. It is difficult to use the web without encountering some sort of a form. Whether you're making a purchase, signing up for a mailing list, requesting product information, or just even firing off a Google search. Like a paper form, a form on a web page allows the user to enter requested information and to submit this information for processing and then to receive the results back. Usually the submitted data is passed on to the server for processing and accessing a database located on the server. Although forms have a wide range of uses, from simple search boxes to complex online shopping interfaces, they're all built out of the same components. Forms are made up of buttons, text fields, and or pull-down menus, collectively known as web form controls, which are used to collect information from the user. Forms may also contain text and other HTML elements. Forms may be styled with CSS as well. Now here's an example of a form, probably the best known example, and the Google search box is one variant of a web form. It's a text box and it's got two buttons at the bottom. The information entered by a user is usually sent to an application running on a server, as we mentioned earlier. It's processed there, and the results are returned to the browser in the form of a web page for display. For example, a Google query, you send the query string to the Google server, where the database is searched to find matches to your query, and then those matches are returned back to you. Now here's a list of some of the form controls. A form may contain one or more of the following. A text entry controls. It could have specialized text entry controls, like for example the password box. It could have submit or reset buttons, or both. Radio and checkbox buttons. Pull down and scrolling menus. File selection and upload control. Could have hidden controls, and it could have some of those new HTML5 controls, things like dates and times, numerical controls, or the color picker control. The majority of the controls are added to a form using the input element, which is embedded within the form element. We're going to see that in just a few moments. There may be any number of input elements inside a form, and the functionality and appearance of the input element changes for each control based on its type attribute. So, the form element. Forms are added to web pages using the form element. It is a container for all the content of the form. It includes any number of form controls, such as text entry fields, for example, or text boxes, and buttons. It may also contain HTML block elements, paragraphs, lists, headers, to name a few. However, please note that a form may not be nested within another form element. Okay, and here's, you can see the syntax for creating the form element. The attributes of the form element. The two main attributes required by the form element are method and action. Method is an attribute that specifies the HTTP method to be used by the browser to deliver the user entered information to the server application. We're going to see this later, the syntax for this, but it's going to be usually either method equals get or method equals post, as you see here on this slide. Action. The action attribute specifies the web address, that is the URL of the server application that will process the information. And here is an example of a form. Okay, these form controls that you see here generate a text box and a submit button. And visually this is what it's going to look like on the screen. The first form control creates the text box, while the second one creates the submit button. The name in the ID attributes. All form control elements should include a name and an ID attribute, or an ID attribute, so that the form processing application can distinguish the various parts of the entered information. For example, if the form contained two text boxes, one for a person's name and the other one for an address, then the name attributes of the two text boxes would distinguish the name information from the address information. The only exceptions are the submit and reset buttons, because they have special functions, submitting or resetting the form, and are not related to any data collection. Note that the reset button resets all form fields to their initial values. Okay, here's an example. The names first name and last name, shown in the red ellipses here, are associated with the data entered by the user in the respective text boxes. So that's for the first name, and that is for the last name. The label element. Perhaps the most useful and meaningful element for structuring forms is the inline label element, which associates some descriptive text, that is a label, with a specific control. This descriptive text may be used to advise or explain to the browser user what a given control is being used for. And each label element is associated with exactly one form control. There are two ways to use the label, as you can see here. One method is called implicit association. It nests the control and its description within a label element. Okay, here's an example of the implicit association. And the other method is called explicit association, and it matches the label with the ID attribute of the control. Okay, so the for attribute that you see here identifies which control the label is associated with. Okay. This approach is useful when the control is not directly next to its descriptive text in the HTML document. It also offers the potential advantage of keeping the label and the control as two distinct elements, which may be useful when styling them with style sheets. The field set and the legend elements. The field set element is used to group a logical set of form controls. A field set may also include a legend element that provides a caption for those enclosed fields. And you can see the syntax below. Okay. Next one we want to look at is the text entry controls. There are two basic types of text entry fields in web forms. Single line text fields, which are often referred to as text boxes, and multi-line text entry fields, which are often referred to as text areas. The single line text field. One of the most simple types of form control is the text entry field used for entering a single word or line of text. This is the so-called text box. It is added to the form using the input element, and its type attribute is set to text. The input element is nested within the form element. Okay. The value attribute may be used to specify some default text that appears in the text box when the form is initially displayed in the browser. If the form is reset, the text box contents return to this default value. Size. Size by default. Browsers display a text entry box that is 20 characters wide, but you can change the number of characters using the size attribute. And max length. By default, users can type an unlimited number of characters in a text field regardless of its size. The display scrolls to the right if the text exceeds the character width of the box. And max length specifies a limit. It allows you to specify a limit. Let's look at an example. Okay, pretty straightforward. We are creating a text box with this one here, and we're setting up the default text to be displayed in the text box. And you can see all the syntax. Alright, next one we want to look at, multi-line text entry field. Sometimes users need to be able to enter more than just one line of text. For these instances, use the text area element that replaces the text box by a multi-line scrollable text entry box. Please note that the text area element has its own text head as shown here, and it does not use the input element. In addition to the required name attribute, the text area element uses the following attributes: rows and calls. Rows specifies the number of lines of text the area should display. Scroll bars will be added if the user types more text than can fit in the allotted space. And calls specifies the width of the text area measured in number of characters. Also, some default text may be specified to appear initially within the text area. Please also know that you may specify the size with CSS as well. Let's take a look at an example. Okay, this is a text area. It has 10 rows and 30 columns, or 30 characters per row, with some optional text initially displayed in the area. Unlike the input element, you can put content between the opening and the closing tags in the text area element. The content of the text area element will show up in the text box when the form is displayed in the browser. It will also get sent to the server when the form is submitted, so carefully consider what goes there. It's not uncommon for developers to put nothing between the opening and closing tags and provide a hint of what should go there with a title or placeholder attribute instead. The placeholder attribute is new with HTML5. Okay, submit and reset buttons. The submit button, when clicked immediately, sends the collected form data to the server for processing. The reset button returns the form controls to the state they were in when the form was first loaded into the browser. Both the submit and the reset buttons are added using the input element. You can see that in here. And no name attribute is required for these. You can see down here the default view, the way that the submit button looks by default, and the way that the reset button is displayed by default. Okay. And here is an example. The text appearing on either button may be changed by use of the value attribute, as noted here in this one example. Okay, this is a good place for us to stop and take a break, and we will continue in a few moments. Thank you.